Hello everyone. Welcome to CT Talks with Premier Brains. We are back again with another episode of knowledge sharing Q&A sessions about UAE corporate tax. In today's session, we'll be discussing the concept of taxation of free zone person under UAE corporate tax. So, a free zone is a legal entity that is either incorporated or established in a free zone or a branch of a mainland company in UAE, or as a foreign legal entity that has transferred its place of incorporation to a free zone in UAE or is registered in a free zone. So, last month in June 2023, two decisions were issued regarding the taxation of free zone person. This is a cabinet decision number 55 of 2023 determining the qualifying income, and ministerial decision number 139 of 2023 regarding the qualifying activities and excluded activities. We'll discuss the various elements of the taxation of the free zone person. Now, since this is a very detailed and important topic, we'll be covering it in two episodes. In today's episode, we'll be covering the concept of qualifying free zone person, qualifying income, and excluded activities. So, my first question to you, ma'am, is who is a qualifying free zone person?
Okay, so before we go into the details of a qualifying free zone person, I would just like to mention that yesterday Ministry of Finance released a public consultation paper on the free zone taxation regime, and they have invited comments from the various stakeholders and asked for their feedback. So this is really a welcome move by the ministry. So this consultation paper is open until 2nd of August 2023 for submitting the comments. So this can clearly show that this is an important thing for the government as well, because there are various free zones in the UAE. So let's see how this progresses further after the feedback is received on the public consultation paper. So moving to your question on a qualifying free zone person. So basically, a qualifying free zone person has to be a juridical person with a free zone person. So juridical person means that there should be a separate legal personality. So for example, natural persons or sole proprietorships cannot be qualifying a free zone person. So a juridical person who is a free zone person and meets certain conditions will be considered as a qualifying free zone person. So what are these conditions? So basically they should maintain adequate substance, and they should not elect to be subject to the regular corporate tax rate. They should derive qualifying income. They should comply with the transfer pricing rules and also maintain transfer pricing documentation. And also they should maintain audited financial statements. And the last condition is that the non-qualifying revenues should not exceed 5% of the total revenues or 5 million, whichever is lower. So this condition is also referred to as the de minimis rule. So if the free zone person does not meet any of these conditions, they would lose the qualifying free zone person status, and this will be for that current tax period and also the subsequent 4 tax periods. So it's very important for the free zone person to ensure that they meet these conditions, otherwise they will lose the qualifying free zone person for a period of 5 years.
In your first point, you had mentioned adequate substance. So, what is meant by adequate substance?
Yeah, so basically, adequate substance means that the qualifying free zone person should have adequate assets, adequate staff in the company, and also incur adequate operating expenditure for the purpose of conducting the core income generating activities. So, a great part of reference can be drawn from the already existing economic substance regulations law, which can give more clarity on the definitions of what are the core income generating activities, etc. Another important thing here is that the substance can be outsourced, but only to a free zone entity, not outside the free zone. And the company still needs to maintain adequate supervision and control over those outsourced activities.
Okay. So, what is the taxation regime for the qualifying free zone person?
Okay, so once a free zone person meets all the conditions of a qualifying free zone person,
Hmm?
then they are eligible for a 0% tax rate on the qualifying activities, and also on transactions with other free zone persons unless they are excluded activities. And if a free zone person has conduct activities in the mainland or in a foreign jurisdiction through a permanent establishment, then any profits which are attributable to that permanent establishment will attract tax at the rate of 9%. Similarly, certain income from the immovable property within the free zone will also attract tax at the rate of 9%. So we will discuss these concepts on the permanent establishment taxation and also on the immovable property transaction in further detail in the next episode.
Okay. So, what income can we classify as qualifying income?
Okay, so these can be divided into three buckets, which I can say. So the first bucket is right if a free zone, qualifying free zone person conducts activities with free zone persons, then those would qualify to be qualifying income,
Okay.
provided that free zone person is the actual beneficial recipient of those services. The second bucket is for transactions with any other persons, which can be non-free zone persons, that is the mainland companies or even foreign persons, provided those are qualifying activities, okay, and not the excluded activities. Even in the first bucket, we have to ensure that none of those transactions are the excluded activities. I think we will discuss what are those excluded activities and what are those qualifying activities. And the third bucket, which is an interesting thing, is that if any other non-qualifying income, if it meets the de minimis requirements, which we just discussed about, that 5% of the total revenues of 5 million, if you meet that, if you do not exceed the de minimis, then that non-qualifying income can also be part of your qualifying income.
Okay. So, what activities can we classify as qualifying activities?
Okay, so basically there is a whole list of activities which have been released by the ministry, which is inclusive basically list, and we have to ensure that the activities fall into that list. So to name those activities, basically these are shipping activities such as the ownership, management and operations of the ship, manufacturing activities which include the processing of the goods, and the distribution activities, which is very commonly undertaken by the free zone companies. But for distribution activities, there are specific conditions that the distribution must be in or from a designated zone, and it should be a B2B kind of a transaction. So basically the goods which you are selling to should be to not to the end consumer but again to a reseller. Okay, and then if any goods or materials are entering the state, then those must be imported through the designated zone. So this is specific to the distribution activity. So the next activity, which is a qualifying activity, are services. Certain services like reinsurance services or logistic services are covered. Then fund management services, wealth and investment management services, headquarter services to the related parties, treasury and financing services to the related parties. So these are very, very important categories of services which have been covered nicely by the ministry in the qualifying activities list. And financing and leasing of aircraft, including engines and rotable components, and holding of shares and securities. And another important point which they have mentioned is if there are any ancillary activities to these list of the qualifying activities, and those would also qualify for a qualifying activity.
Okay. So, then what are the excluded activities for which the income derived it won't be considered qualifying?
Okay, so basically excluded activities we need to consider both for transactions with free zone persons and for the transactions with any other persons. So if we are doing excluded activities, those would not qualify for the qualifying income unless, of course, we satisfy the de minimis requirement. So those excluded activities basically are any transactions with the natural persons, with few exceptions of related to ship, aircraft, fund, and wealth and investment. So any transactions with natural persons would be considered excluded activity. Then banking and insurance activities, unless there's a reinsurance, would be excluded activity. Finance and leasing activities, except treasury and financing to the related parties and related to the aircrafts. Then ownership or exploitation of immovable property, except if it is related to commercial property located in the free zone and the transaction is with the free zone persons, only then. Otherwise it will be an excluded activity. And the another excluded activity is actually the ownership or exploitation of intellectual property.
Okay.
So that these are the specific list of the excluded activities. So any revenues which are derived from these excluded activities which exceed the de minimis threshold, this will then disqualify the qualifying free zone from this beneficial free zone taxation regime.
Okay. So with that said, we come to an end to the episode, and I hope today's session was informative and interesting. And we'll be back again with our next episode in covering the remaining topics regarding the free zone taxation under UAE corporate tax. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.